Welcome to another episode of Lighting the Candle, A World That Works. I'm Bill Carell, and I have with me my two compatriots, Lisa Sheehan and Ken Caputo, who are incidentally a original cast from some 92 episodes ago. We get together and we record these conversations with a couple of things in mind, but mostly we start with you in mind. We're really doing something that we love to do, and that's to talk about empowerment. And then the other thing is to create empowerment and share it. So while we're having these conversations, I want you to send us your energy, your thoughts, your questions metaphysically, and we'll see if we can get them addressed for you right here live. So with that in mind, I really don't have a topic for today. And perhaps what we could do is we could kick off with maybe a definition for the word nothing. And an interesting conversation to have is, how does nothing show up in the world? And I don't mean it facetiously. I mean, if you were going to have a conversation with nothing and about nothing, where would you go to find information to have this conversation? So for instance, just to get things started, when I took on the practice of meditation 25, 30 years ago, the instruction was to think of nothing. So that was the very first thing to notice, what shows up in quest of nothing. And so I also went through some pretty rigorous training. Werner Erhard, and his whole philosophy was, there's only one way to create a possibility or transform, and that is to have a space or a clearing where that can now be brought into existence through language and speaking. So for instance, there's either nothing there to create in, or anything that you create on top of something else is a variation or reference to that thing, either bigger, better, more, whatever, right? Faster, slower, whatever, all comparative to what's already there. So first of all, does anybody have a definition of nothing?
Seinfeld.
Perfect. What was that, 7 years of nothing?
That was the whole description of it. It was a show about nothing.
About nothing, yes. Interesting. So the thoughts that we have, those 80,000 thoughts or so, I like that number, so that's why I keep using it. But I will try not to say inconceivable more than once or twice today. The thought that if you have a definition of nothing, it has to use something to define nothing, yes?
Correct. Do you want to know the definition?
Yes.
Or the limited ones that they have here? Not anything, no single thing, having no prospect of progress or of no value, and not at all.
Yeah, I guess said differently, it's the absence of something. But to notice that it's nothing means you have to be comparing it to something.
Definitely.
Yeah. So again, it would show up first as a dichotomy. There's either something or there's nothing, like two sides of it. But what if the whole idea of nothing is the clearing away, the clearing away, the clearing away? It seems like nothing, but no, that's not it. When people think and they engage in practices for self-improvement, for example, the ideal has to come from some place and be placed into your thinking such that you can recreate that state as a state of mind who you are now that you will be in the future. Does that make sense?
I don't know.
Well, it kind of springboards off of the thought of, you can, anything you can what is it? Anything you can conceive, believe, you can achieve, right? Or variations on that theme. So you have to have a thought, that new, better question, more typically than an answer thought, to guide you on that path of structuring the mundane rigor of the daily practices to get you to that ultimate goal. And I wonder, thinking in terms of how that goes, I wonder if Tom Brady is sitting at home figuring out how he can have Super Bowl ring number 8 after all. So this kind of calls forth in this conversation that I am building, and I see the looks on both of your faces where you are taking it on board, or you're thinking, what is this idiot up to this week? No, I know. So you're taking it on board, and what would be a complementary stab at nothing and usefulness of nothing? And is nothing useful, or is it useless? After all, it's nothing, right?
I think, yeah, go ahead, Ken.
Oh, no, I guess it's just kind of interesting from, like, I think it's really the dynamic created between no thing and thing that actually creates the experience of, that we're having, or the perceptions of the experience we're having. So I remember, I was working with new teachers and talking about cadence and, and how to utilize their voice in a way that becomes engaging. And one of the things we talk about is the notes don't make the song, it's the space between the notes that make the song. So, and it's the dynamic of how you utilize the sound and the no sound and the rhythm and timing of that actually creates the value. So, and I think that just what's interesting is now you're just really talking about the view. In some art, in some Japanese art, the idea is to define the art through the space that's created, not through the things. So you're not looking at what's filling the space, you're looking at the filler as the thing that draws attention to the space. So they're both there, if we're playing like ones and zeros binary, here. But to me, it's like, it's neither one nor the other. I mean, one of the best words of advice I was given for meditation, because you have thoughts, there's all the racing thoughts, and it wasn't to think of nothing. It was just have the thoughts until you stop having thoughts. And the quicker you go through that process of just acknowledging the thoughts, over time, you have there's just a calming, and the lack of thought starts to appear. And then once in a while, they'll just kind of pop into your awareness like a bubble. And it's like, oh, that's interesting, and it just, all it does is remind you that you're in no thought or no mind, martial arts terms, as opposed to in thoughtfulness. So there you go. That's what I got.
Well, I like it. I like it. It implies a capacity, both in ability and in size. And so the interesting dynamic that goes on there is, if you were going to teach somebody how to not have a thought, then by making them have no thoughts first, the idea is to demonstrate the hopelessness of that practice. It's not possible. I know. I do an exercise with groups of people, business people, and I'd say, all right, I'm going to time the next 10 seconds, and I want you to have no thoughts during that 10-second period. Invariably, somebody will hold their hand up in the air and say, I did it. And I'm skeptical of people that do that, but there's always somebody in the group who says they did it. And at one point, this young lady looks over at the guy who said, I had no thoughts for 10 minutes. And she looked at him and she said, wow, you don't listen to anybody, do you? You don't even listen to yourself.
Oh, gosh.
I said, let's do it again. And this time he said, yeah, those thoughts. I get it. So the whole idea of being a human being racing through space, and I don't know, how fast are we flying on planet Earth? It's fast. And the fact of the matter is, to be able to, in a moment, transition from whatever thoughts you're having to thoughts you want to have is, again, almost like that Japanese painting you were describing, Ken. There have to be spaces in order for the other shapes to occur. Shape with no space is no shape.
Well, and I guess it's even like I think it's just a matter of attention and degree. So like we're all capable of having no thought, and no matter how microscopic, there's probably space between thoughts. So now you're just talking about skillfulness at it or attention to it, but it's always there all the time. These things aren't separate from ourselves. It's just, I remember reading this book called Insight, and they were talking about the science behind like shower thoughts, and the fact that when you have an insight, you tend to have that insight well before you notice that you had the insight. So, and what's happening is, just the busyness of your day and all the stimuli is actually shielding you from what you know, but you already know it. So then you're in the shower and you relax. So, and you become open. So then up pops this insight like it's from out of nowhere, but it's not from out of nowhere. It was always there. So our ability to be thoughtless or thoughtful, we all have that capacity. We just are in different states of awareness and noticing of that. So, so it's just kind of an interesting thing. I wonder, in a lot of the more Eastern based traditions that have been shared with me, it's not a either or, it's a dynamic interrelation of both and, whereas some of the more Western stuff, it's either I'm in a state of thoughtlessness or I'm in a state of racing thoughts or thoughtfulness, whatever it is. So, and that seems a little incomplete.
Sure. It almost seems like thoughts have a hierarchy, or they have some sort of a family tree. For example, to have a thought about this subject and then immediately have another thought about another subject and then back to a different subject and another subject, our minds don't typically work that way. Sometimes there's an incrementality to it, if you will. The thoughts are had or occur, and then a question gets raised about it in definition or understanding, or just to be able to fully appreciate the thought for what it is as an idea. And the thought transition from it being a thought to an idea is, I say that's a transformational occurrence, because all the thoughts that you have all day long that don't lead you to some sort of an implied action or some sort of a solution or some sort of a something that your brain is working on. I mean, our minds work so hard 24/7. And for the most time, it has nothing to do with anything other than hunger, temperature, fear, happiness. They're just like a jumble of all of these, kind of strings of thoughts, as opposed to the random popping of popcorn where none of it comes from the other. They just are in a vessel that all is happening at the same time or different times.
I like to talk about the different people inside your head too, because that's the common thing that holds people back from meditating, by people telling them that they should have no thought. And we all know it's, you can have thoughts pass by and not pay attention to them, but you can't not have no thought. I mean, I have a person inside my head, I call her the Countess. I find her just counting randomly when I'm not even paying attention. All of a sudden I realize I'm counting in my head.
That's fun.
The countess is, so I'm thinking that's what that gentleman in the audience had, where you told him to be quiet for 10 minutes or not have any thoughts for 10 minutes. He was counting in his head. You know what I mean? So he was paying attention to something, just wasn't aware of it. So it's just being unaware and aware. And the other part, I was thinking like comparing darkness to it, because darkness isn't a thing. It's the absence of light. So you could look at space that way too. It's we may call it space. It may seem like nothing, but it's something. I mean, black holes in space are considered a lot of something. Just appear to be no thing, or a black thing, or a dark thing. And that's even the people that don't think they have somebody in their head talking, because if you instruct them to say, okay, I want you to not have anybody, to stop the voices in your head for a moment. And then somebody inevitably will say, I don't have any voices in their head will say, I don't have any voices in my head. Well, that's the voice that we're talking about. So, people just aren't even aware of that they're aware that there's no things are there. Their voices in their head, it's still something, but.
Yeah, until you go to a seminar and somebody says that thing to you that you just said, most people are like, well, wait a minute, that's just me, But here's the fun thing. I played with having the voice in my head sound like James Earl Jones, and later on Gene Hackman, So I'm hearing a narration, and James Earl Jones back when he used to say, "This is CNN," Back in the 90s when Bernie was crawling around over in Iraq. So the point of all of this is to gamify it, and have it be fun, and light, as opposed to that traditional cartoon picture of the monk with only a wrap around his groin area, sitting atop a mountain, contemplating his navel. That was really that was kind of the caricature of what people thought Eastern philosophy was in the Western culture in the 60s and 70s. As we started to have people like the Beatles, and Mia Farrow and a few other people start going over there and importing all of those Indian and Eastern philosophers to come to the United States and take all of their worldly goods. Quite a fun thing, to have somebody who's a Swami who has 7 Rolls Royces and 13 houses and all that sort of thing, and all of them are located in Beverly Hills somewhere. Not bad, huh? It's good. It's a good gig if you can get it. So here we are. We've got a nothing as it relates to thought and thinking. Where else? And we had nothing in space. I really like that one. If there's nothing there to return or reflect photons, then it's going to occur as black. And I wonder, is speaking and listening a little bit like that too?
We practice a principle of no trace. It's kind of a Zen term, and you can look it up and find more definitions, but we use it in terms of leadership, speaking, communicating, teaching. And the idea behind it is to create value and impact invisibly. So, so like if you're supporting someone in teaching a class, it's helping their class better without, to better their class without anyone recognizing that you're doing it. So you leave no trace of your presence. There's nothing that draws attention to the fact that you are creating a positive influence on the situation instead of drawing attention to your actions. So it's like the ultimate art of leading is to be invisible in a way where someone else is receiving the accolades or the attention or whatever it is. They're feeling and delivering the value, but you are invisibly supporting it. So that's what just came to mind from that.
The mind picture for me is the way that Jack Welch sat in a room and just was a presence. And when he spoke, it would be no more than 1 or 2 sentences. And it made all the difference in the world. The power of that listening, and everyone was looking to him for the leadership that he was allowing for them to invent from their chairs. He was calling that forth.
Yeah, this even evolves it a little bit beyond that. Like I'll give you an example. I'd be in team meetings, and I would Slack message someone else in the meeting to ask a question, or have them, so like no one even knew other than that one person that it was coming from me. Like I wouldn't speak out loud. I would just, as invisibly as possible, keep things moving. As the leader, I needed to keep it going in the right direction, but I wanted the focus not being on me, the one standing up saying I'm doing that. So you would touch other people, and digitally worked really well, because I could just, hey, what they just said, ask them about this, or remember we talked about this, can you bring that up now? So, and it wasn't me directing it, so I would go completely unnoticed. Often I'd look like I was distracted and on my phone, but I wasn't. I was actually directing the meeting from behind the scenes, that kind of thing.
Do you think people have like some natural ability to do that? Because I'm thinking that's something that you just named that I think I've often done. And then the internet, just like you said, made it that much easier. But that's always been, like I said, you just named something that's kind of the way I was in circles and things like that,
Yeah, it's a style, and we're all capable of it. And one thing that's interesting, especially when we play with the 5 animal mindsets, these kind of solution minds, especially someone that kind of resonated more with Crane, where they're more interested in understanding the full picture of the perspective and utilizing structure and not a lot of exertion or energy to create the best result. Those people tend to gravitate towards that. Whereas someone that we would call more tiger, where they like to kind of take charge and lead from the front, you don't see it as often in them, but they're still capable of doing it. But their style would be more, they speak up, they speak out, they kind of more, tangibly direct things. But yeah.
Is there a place you could look up those 5 animals, that people could look up those characteristics? No place at all?
It is in my head. Well, not my head. So there's a lot of stuff about the 5 animals. Most of it, to my knowledge, is around martial arts fighting system. Right. Myself and my mentor, we evolved over 30 years an entire kind of teaching and leadership thing that was really around the mindsets of it. So yeah, so I have stuff, but I don't know that you could go online and find much of what I'm talking about, because it's something that we developed internally. I teach it in schools all over the place. I was actually at a school this morning teaching it to 3rd graders. So,
What are the 5 animals though? Because you could kind of guess what by the qualities of that animal itself, right?
So yeah. So you've got listening, empathy, yielding, and structure, non-confrontational. That's Crane. You have confidence, amplifying your strengths, direct, honest, compassionate, and nurturing. That's Tiger. You have creative, what we would call counter-offensive. Like you come up with ideas that no one knew. You do the unexpected. You come up with those creative solutions, usually with a lot of precision and mobility, like in flexibility. That's Leopard. Intense, data-driven, focus, detail-oriented, kind of like tunnel vision, but also not relying on external sources at all. That's Snake. And then the 5th one is actually the wisdom mind of all of those things coming together and expressing themselves in win-win situations. That's Dragon. So Dragon isn't something you actually practice. It comes from the few people willing to actually cultivate within themselves all 4 of the other animal solution minds until they become kind of interwoven. And then Dragon just kind of happens. It's like a alloy. of all the other things. So yeah, so tiger, leopard, snake, crane, dragon.
Cool.
5.
Thank
Yep.
you.
Yeah, my teacher always referred to it as the 5 ways to win. You can do them all. And instead of feeling like you have to be one way all the time,
Right.
it gives you 5 choices and you can test them. And when one doesn't work, you switch. You know, be playful with it.
Yeah, instead of labeling everybody as one or the other.
Yeah,
Like in
no,
these things,
actually,
you have most qualities of, any kind of personality or, style or separation that you want to, everybody's got them all, but it's just to different degrees and at different times it could change too.
yeah. Yeah, one of the leadership things we do is I call it the compass builder, and it's actually understanding your relationship to the 4 animals, with dragon being at the center. And you go through this practice of helping people understand what their preferred way of being is, which animal it mostly reflects, how they respond, and then how the other 2 fit in. So you start recognizing you have the capacity to utilize all of them. You just have certain preferences in how they manifest. And then what you do is you look at people around you and
Yep.
you start recognizing what they like. And instantly we use it in team building. So now it's like, oh, I'm very tigerish, but that person's preference is crane. So
Yep.
there's going to be, this kind of dynamic that's created between a tiger and a crane that's going to be different if it's a snake and a snake, or a leopard and a crane, whatever it is. Yeah, it's really interesting stuff. It's been a lot of fun.
It looks to me as more of an Eastern disc analysis, where
It's sort of, yeah.
but the traditions, it's, I think what you're discussing in the way that that you and John have, languaged this and teach it and allow people this metaphor that they can try on these groups of I would call them ingredients, ingredients of thinking and constitution that would allow you in a moment to choose whether or not it's working for you or another style might work better first as training wheels while you're getting to that, on the road to dragon, where, and now you've made choices as you go back and forth through these different styles of thinking, acting, and being. And now when you get to the point where all of the reaction is just an authentic interaction with the world as it comes to you, now you're full dragon and there's no noticing that you're a dragon at all.
Yeah. Yeah, you just, usually if you notice it, it knocks you right out of it.
Yep.
That's the other
You
corollary.
realize it after
Nothing.
the fact, or you
Yeah.
realize it looking through the eyes of someone else or the situation. Like, I've had it happen in, teaching like 600 students all in one shot, and just realizing that they were all in rhythm. Like, and as soon as I realized it, it would start to fall apart. And then you can't make it come back either.
Yeah.
It's just, such an interesting thing. But and the other thing that you mentioned, the disc thing, one of the things I find fascinating is how we will tend to, and I learned this the hard way through years, like people would start to fixate and say, well, I'm just tiger. So like they would start to associate their identity with a certain style instead of thinking in terms of you're more skillful naturally at tiger, but you can cultivate all of these things. It's just simply maybe you're just less skillful at crane. But if you practice it, you are perfectly capable. It's just not one that your personality, whatever that means, just lends itself more towards this. And wouldn't it be interesting to see what would happen, how much more value you can create for yourself and others if you cultivated additional skill sets that give you more options, more ways to win in situations. So, yeah, it's
And I
interesting.
would offer for your approval that a tiger isn't always tiger.
No, actually,
in the wild, a tiger has the ability of a full range of responses to a situation, up
Yep.
to and including being loving and nurturing and caring and that sort of a thing. And if you think that there's any question about that, I've got a video for you to watch. It's really remarkable. It's a little short thing that kind of took my breath away. It was a man at a zoo dancing with a tiger in the water and playing, jumping back and forth. And a tiger goes after him. I mean, it's like a, 450, 500 pound animal. jumping at this man in the water, which is where it would be the safest for a human being to do any of this. But I still wonder, if the guy was playing with a full deck or not. Trainers do get into trouble from time to time. So that's where I'm drawing, my conclusion that even a tiger isn't just tiger.
Yeah, in the end, what John used to say is really they're all dragon. You just have the dragon being reflected through the tiger, so there's this, and and that's what's so interesting about it is, again, you're cultivating these things, and it's kind of a little Dunning-Krugerish. You're first learning it and you're like, oh, I get it, that's me. But the longer you go, you start to realize how little you know,
right,
and how broad and expansive it is. So
all I can think too is that we're all born dragons.
Yeah,
I agree.
Yeah.
Then we get language, and it gets screwed up after that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Damn words.
Yeah.
But now you're back to the nothing. It's like, we talk the Tibetan sky mind, where they'd ask the question, are you the clouds, racing through the sky, or are you the sky noticing the clouds as they come and go? And we tend to be taught to think like clouds, not like the sky, as we grow up. And, I spent half of my life trying to convince adults to pick up their crayons again. And because they've been taught, that they can't do that, or they don't have time, or they're fixed in their ways, or whatever it is. So it's just not true. It's all still there.
Well, it's probably why because that mandala coloring was so popular for a hot minute, so I mean, it's still there, but it wasn't, it had its strong comeback for a minute there, but and everybody was creating their own mandalas for people to color in. And it was actually, it was a part, form of meditation too. People would come gather together in classes when we could back in the day and color together.
I absolutely love a box of crayons because there are so many lessons to be taught in each box. The powerful one that made an impression on me is taking the one crayon out and breaking it in half, and then demonstrating that you can still draw and color just equally as well as a whole crayon. And so that leads off into this long discussion, 15 or 20 minutes, about how does this relate to human beings? How does it relate to our relationships? How does it relate to, well, there's a useful thing about being whole. And again, human beings really suck at being whole. And quite frankly, wouldn't recognize that state if it bit us on the rear end, right? For the most part, our life is just a daisy chain of trying to survive the last thing that happened to us in our head, in the physical world, or or spiritually. And as we do stuff like this, and we start talking metaphorically about all these different ways to process the world and process love and fear and all of our emotional side, as well as the physical side, pain. I ate some food for lunch today, and while you were talking about, the dragon kind of being focused through that, it's kind of like, what does my life look like while I'm in the middle of a bowl of spicy Italian wedding style soup, and there's sweat rolling off of my forehead, and I'm gasping for breath, as opposed to if I were just eating a sandwich, or something of that nature, or having Mexican or Chinese food, or all these different ways for the moment to be completely altered and occur quite differently. And the other thing, go ahead. The other thought that I had about the sky is the sky doesn't know that it ends when the clouds do. It thinks it goes on into eternity.
It does.
It's funny. Yeah,
the only thing that, because it's a word that's been coming into play both physically, nutritionally, and spiritually, and mentally, homeostasis. Which if you break it down, could be a level of nothing. Because it's not one way or the other. It's the origin. It's the beginning. It's the basis.
And what's the word? What is the dictionary definition of homeostasis?
Well, for the way it's been appearing to me is like from fasting. Fasting is a way to get your body back to homeostasis. I was watching a video this morning. The woman that was a psychoanalyst in the movie Social Dilemma that I
Right.
know we've all mentioned before, and she's talking about getting the brain back to homeostasis because it doesn't like to fluctuate from pain to I forget the good part from pain to
Pleasure.
good. Um, it likes to be in the middle, and so every time it goes veering this way, it's going to have to come back in direct proportion the opposite way, and we would be at our happiest physically and mentally to be in homeostasis kind of thing. But I'll look up the definition too.
I think I got one for you. Here, try this on for size.
Okay.
In biology, homeostasis is the state of steady internal physical and chemical conditions maintained by living systems. This is the condition of optimal functioning for the organism and includes many variables such as body temperature, fluid balance, being kept in certain preset limits, the homeostatic range. Other variables include the pH of extracurricular fluid, concentration of sodium, potassium, et cetera, et cetera. We're getting into a real medical kind of but it's brought on by natural resistance to change when already in the optimal conditions.
Sounds like I talked to an acupuncturist, and he was saying, and my martial arts teacher would say this too, is something overworking or underworking? And it wasn't, so like, he's like, I'm looking at your liver, and either it's not working hard enough, or it's working too hard, or it's doing what it's designed to do. And all he's doing is encouraging it to get back to center, which sounds like and it was always interesting to me, because how often do we find ourselves thinking that we want more without limit,
Right.
or less until it's completely gone, like stress. I mean, Dennis Waitley's in Psychology of Winning, he said the only truly tensionless state is death. You need stress. Stress is what leads to stimulation and growth. So it's not about having no stress. However, if you have a disproportionate amount of stress, yes, you need to bring it back into a state of homeostasis, but you may not have enough, which is lead to boredom, apathy, decay. So you need to add a little bit, a little more stimulation, a little more stress in your life. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but we don't think that way. We don't think about that place of homeostasis as often as we do swinging between the extremes. And I wonder if that's why that's showing up more now. That makes a lot of sense. I think that's healthy.
Yeah, and that was because in our culture, especially because we can't deal with the pain, we have all these ways to eliminate it, which prevents us from going back to center. So we're just in more and more trouble from not getting ourselves back to center, or at least trying.
Yeah.
If you're always in this state of maintaining the no pain inauthentically, there's no point where you actually get to equilibrium and things are operating in a maintainable, optimum kind of a fashion. That's interesting.
Well, if you're paying attention, pain is healthy. It's helpful. It's your friend. It's not an enemy.
Dashboard light,
Yeah.
And if you're in balance, you can sense it more. Because
yeah.
if you're off balance, you can't even sense that it's anything that's approaching you that could be painful or even happy for that matter.
Yeah. And it's interesting. I in endurance training, we would talk a lot, especially things like cycling, where you're climbing for half an hour or whatever, and you're not ignoring the pain, and you're not trying to get away with the pain. You're listening to the pain, and you have a relationship with it, and it's informing you as to how well you can perform. And yes, that discomfort continues to increase, but you're like dancing on the edge of it. Do like lactic threshold training and stuff like that. And it wasn't, you weren't moving away from it, but you also weren't taking it on disproportionately. It was finding that balancing point. That was the focal point, was balance, not more of or less of. Those are just symptomatic of how you address it to maintain that place of balance. Yeah, that's interesting.
Well, I find that, especially now, since I'm running again, which I never thought I would, getting to that place in probably, I don't know, a little over a half a mile, where it's just maintaining at the same level of discomfort, where it's neither unbearable or, completely um, euphoric, but there's this sense of losing, uh, like a sense of losing track of exactly where I am, and not remembering when I went past the first place where I count another lap, because I'm just in the moment, kind of experiencing all that my body is giving me. And I'm looking forward to being able to run 3, 4, 5 mile uh, races sometime this summer. Uh, and I it's hard for me to talk about because I had kind of given up after having a torn meniscus back in 2005, 2006. And it was so painful for me to run back in those days. And also getting the news that apparently I had no more cartilage that was left between my knee joints, and even had some arthritis. So I guess that's pretty normal for somebody who's going to be 60 years old soon, 15 years ago. And that was when I made a decision. It wasn't because I went out and ran and it didn't work. It was because there was a conversation about how running was not going to be for me anymore. So I got a little crazy, in November, and said, well, let's just run for 5 minutes and see what that's like. It's like, that's not bad, And then before I knew it, I'm running 40 minutes a day, It's not really getting a lot of distance out of it, but moving my stuff for 40 minutes, which is kind of fun.
Did you have knee surgery?
No, I
Oh.
did not have knee surgery. In fact, the guy that I'm not going to say his name on here, but he also was the orthopedic surgeon for the Yukon Huskies, almost all of the athletic programs up there. Some people will hear that and they'll know who I'm talking about. But we went in, and my knee was about the size of a really, really big, rubber ball. And when we got done with the MRI, came back and said, yeah, you got a definite tear. It may or may not be a candidate for operating on soon. I'm going to send you home. I want to see you in 3 weeks. When I came back in, it was back all the way back down to normal. The swelling was all gone, all the rest of it. And he said, look, here's how we're going to do this. At some point in the future, you're going to be in so much pain that you can't stand it any longer. Then you're going to call me, and that's when we'll do the operation. And so that day never came.
Cool.
Hey, want a good app that's super helpful? I've been using it. It's a Nike Run Club.
Sure.
And they'll do guided runs, and they also have some really cool training plans for things like if you want to run a 5K or whatever. But what's good about it is they talk a lot about mechanics and posture, and also like varying up your runs. So they'll do intervals and fartleks and recovery and tempo. So and for all kinds of distances, it's really good.
All right.
And they'll just talk you through it, and kind of encourage you a little bit and remind you about, things like mechanics. So you don't hurt yourself doing it.
So while we're doing this, I'm actually looking it up, and you at home can do the same thing. That's Nike
Run Club, free app. All the information, it doesn't cost anything to join it. You can share. There's a community, and they have dozens and dozens of guided runs, everywhere from 15 minutes to, half marathons, whatever it is you want.
I am in the process of downloading it as we speak. Thank you for your contribution.
You betcha.
So let's go back and let's talk a little bit about Jerry Seinfeld. And as it turns out, the show was not about nothing. I mean, it never was about nothing.
It could never be, right?
Could never be about nothing. It was about nothing that was interesting to journalists. It was about nothing that was interesting to anybody other than a comedian. If you want to really say what's so,
Right.
comedians find these little cultural ticks and isms and sayings, and where cliches, where if you say something, everybody gets it. And it was just amazing, how it was a little bit like what Archie Bunker and Michael Stivic used to do, back in the early 1970s, where they would debate which is better, the toilet paper over the top or underneath. Or if you're going to be in a fire and you don't have your socks and your shoes on, do you put on both socks first and then put on your shoes, or do you put on one sock and one shoe? And they would go back and they'd have these fights about what was the right way for you to do that. And that was kind of about nothing.
Oh yeah.
I think Jerry and his team, they just took it to the nth degree, and so much so that they got tired of it before the audience did. Can you imagine being that guy who's at the top of his game, making all the money that he ever wanted to make, being offered a lot more money to stay on and have 3 more seasons, and he says, "Nah, I think I'm going to take a break."
And now it's kind of standard operating procedure for shows. They just have a limit. They know how many years they're going to run without even thinking about it. So that's kind of interesting how that influenced the whole industry almost.
It parlays some careers into some other really great careers, but then there are other people who take that break and they come back, and now they're trying to get that formula going again. And I see that in comedy quite a little. Even folks like what's his name, Dennis Miller, tried to make the leap from being a comedian to being a political pundit. I'm at some point we just lost track of him. I don't even know where he is right now, but I loved listening to that man do stand up and interview people. I loved watching him do interviews. So what else about nothing today?
I don't think I wrote anything else down.
If you think about the perfect homeostatic place for people to be, it's not going to be hyper this or hypo that.
Right.
It's going to be in the zone of not measurable,
or even beyond that, like not even caring that there's, what I mean, that measurement is not a part of it. Like all the Zen people that you can picture, when they don't, well, the way I've read it too is like, you don't give anything that much credence by holding on to the really happy points or the really bad points of life. You know what I mean? If they're not sustainable, so you might as well just notice them and be aware of them, and that kind of concept, but not to focus on them or stay with one or the other.
The journey is the home.
Yeah. Well,
right.
and that you're, as good as it gets when it doesn't matter, and it doesn't matter that it doesn't matter. The whole notion of being noticing what's going on outside before you're noticing what's going on inside. I think that would be where I would feel like perhaps that was homeostasis for me in particular. That, from the skin out, I'm observing and participating fully and really engaged in the world with all of that biological stuff. And that's, for me, is like when time accelerates, when you really are fully engaged with something, and the moment is just so engaging. 3 hours go by. It seems like, well, that was 15 minutes, wasn't it? No.
I remember reading or hearing somebody say too, it's like to be like the room you're in. The room you're in doesn't care what's going on within it. It stays the room. You know what I mean?
And it doesn't even know it's a room.
Basically, right? Exactly. I mean, somewhere in between there.
It's like, another guy that I used to run around and get trained by when we were on a cruise to Alaska. We did a week-long seminar and training, and he would look wistfully out over, the Mendenhall Glacier, and then there's a mount something or other over here and a mount something over there. But you're in the land of thousands of mountains. It's just mountains as far as you can see when you get up in a helicopter. And so he would point out over on the horizon. He would say, "You see that mountain over there? That mountain has no idea it's not as beautiful as that mountain." And in the it takes a human being, it takes a human being.
Yeah.
So, well, I think we're getting pretty close to being dry here. So,
Oh, that's perfect timing too.
absolutely. Yeah. Anyway, any thoughts you want to kind of wrap up with, or any thoughts you want to leave with our listeners? And we really appreciate you guys coming by to listen.
I just think being mindful of where you are, in the moment kind of thing, and to try to get back to that center point. It's not easy, but it's a good thing to work towards.
It's interesting. We could do this for another half hour,
Do nothing.
Yeah, I was just gonna say,
Ooh.
if it looks like it's work, it's because it is, so stop. That's
You
good.
could just be, just be quiet and just sign out. Don't even say anything. Just do nothing for the last minute.
Time for a siesta. Pull that sombrero down over your knees and just kind of nap out for a little while.
Contemplate.
Anyhow, thank you both, Ken and Lisa. Absolutely adore our time together. And I wish you guys the best week ever. And thanks for your energy, and thanks for coming by. And folks at home, we are lighting the candle here, a world that works. We have so many people out there that are really working hard to get to homeostasis. Go tell them to cut it out. Stop working so hard trying to get to homeostasis and just get to homeostasis. All right. Bye-bye for now.
Have a good week.
Bye.
You've been listening to Lighting the Candle, a world that works, part of the Exvadio Podcast Network. You can catch us each week, as well as the rest of the network, at exvadio.com/podcasts, as well as the Apple Podcasts app, Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, Audible, Amazon Music, and wherever you find podcasts.